September 15th, 1979, Pozneck, East Germany. The air was damp and still, carrying the faint hum of insects over the meadows. Somewhere in the darkness, a match flared, tiny, trembling hands shielding its light from view. A hiss of flame caught on oiled cloth. Then, the sudden whoomph of ignition. A balloon, handmade from hundreds of stitched-together bedsheets, began to swell and breathe in the heat of the burner. Two families crouched in the long grass, their faces lit in orange flickers. Peter Strelzik, a 37-year-old electrician, tightened the burner valve, his jaw locked in grim concentration. Beside him, his friend and partner in crime, Gunter Wetzel, wiped soot from his cheek. Their wives, Petra and Hanna, whispered to their children, 4 in total, trying to muffle the quivering fear that could undo everything. Above them, the balloon's patchwork skin rippled, white, blue, yellow, like a ghost of color against the black sky. It looked absurdly fragile, more toy than aircraft. But if it held, it might carry them across the most heavily guarded border on Earth. A gust rolled through the field, bending the grass. Strelzik glanced toward the east, the direction of the patrol lights. They swept rhythmically, as they always did, over the barbed wire and death strip that cut through Germany like a scar. Beyond that line lay the West, freedom. He muttered to Gunter, "Once we're up, there's no turning back." "Good, because there's nothing left to turn back to." The burner roared again. The balloon strained upward, tether ropes creaking. The smell of propane mixed with singed fabric. One child whimpered. Petra clutched his face in her palms, whispering, "Don't make a sound." They had failed twice before, balloons torn apart by wind or deflated by rain. Each time they'd packed up the evidence before dawn, hearts pounding at every truck that passed. The Stasi's eyes were everywhere, neighbors, teachers, even family. And if anyone suspected, prison, or worse. But this time, the winds were right. The forecast had promised clear skies, and Strelzik had tested the burners again and again in his shed, timing the heat and calculating lift. Every detail had been carved into his nerves by months of trial and terror. Now, at 2:38 a.m., the fabric billowed to full form, an enormous, sagging sphere catching its breath. "Get in!" Peter hissed. The family scrambled into the makeshift wicker gondola, really just a steel-framed basket lined with canvas. Peter yanked the release rope, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. The balloon swayed, stubbornly rooted to the earth. Then, with a shudder and a sound like carrying paper, it lifted. The ground fell away, slowly at first, then faster. A chorus of gasps erupted from the gondola. Below them, the dark fields of East Germany unfurled into shadow and silence. A kilometer away, at a guard post, 2 East German border soldiers leaned on their rifles, bored and half asleep. One of them squinted at the horizon. "You see that?" he murmured. His partner followed his gaze. A faint, glowing orb was drifting upward. "Probably a toy balloon," the other said with a laugh. "Someone's kid lost it." The first soldier smirked. "Yeah, right, into West Germany." He let the matter drop. After all, who escapes a socialist superstate in a bedsheet balloon? Up above, Peter adjusted the burner, trying to steady the flame. The balloon climbed into the low clouds, swallowing them whole. Moisture condensed on the edges of the fabric. It groaned, stretched. The wind pressed against their faces, icy and wild. Below them, the death strip gleamed. Floodlights, raked sand, tripwires, minefields. One wrong gust could drop them straight into it. Petra clung to her son as the balloon tilted. The burner coughed, then caught again. The children whimpered, the noise swallowed by the wind. For the next 20 minutes, they drifted in near silence. No one spoke. No one dared. The burner's roar came in short bursts, timed to keep them invisible on radar. Peter's calculated gamble. At 2:59 a.m., the wind shifted. Stronger now, westerly. Peter's pulse jumped. That's it. That's the push. The balloon tipped forward, caught by the current. Beneath them, the floodlight shrank. The wall was no longer a line, but a memory. Still, no one breathed the word safe. Not yet. Because behind them, in the command centers of the Grenztruppen, someone had finally noticed something on radar. Something small, faint, and unexplainable. And it was moving west.
The balloon was now swallowed by darkness and cloud. To the people below, it would have looked like a drifting spark, here one moment, gone the next. But to the 8 souls inside that fragile craft, every breath felt like it might be their last. Inside the gondola, the burner hissed and sputtered, throwing brief flashes of light over pale faces. The children were wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide, pupils reflecting the fire. Petra clutched her son tightly, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. Gunter crouched at the edge, peering through the mist. "We're higher than we've ever gone," he said, his voice trembling, not from fear, but from the cold. The air up here bit like knives, and the balloon's thin skin offered no shelter. Peter nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the instruments he'd cobbled together in his garage: an altimeter from a broken barometer, a compass from a hunting kit, a stopwatch taped to a plank of wood. None of it was meant to guide an aircraft, let alone a homemade one, but tonight it was all they had. He checked the compass again. Still west, still good. Below them, the earth was invisible, just darkness and the occasional pinprick of light from distant watchtowers. Somewhere in that void lay the Grenze, the East German border, a 1,400-kilometer stretch of minefields, barbed wire, and self-firing machine guns. One sudden downdraft could kill them all. The wind screamed louder. The balloon rocked violently, the fabric groaning in protest. "Burner, keep it steady," Peter shouted. Gunter twisted the valve and the flames surged, lighting the inside of the balloon like a cathedral fire. The heat expanded the air and they rose again, spinning into the blackness. Below them, the radar station at Sonnenberg had begun to chatter. Operators squinted at their screens, confused by the faint echo crossing their sector. "Could be a flock of birds," one suggested. "Birds don't fly at 6,000 feet, another muttered. "Send word to headquarters." A few miles east, a Stasi officer was awoken from his bed. Within 15 minutes, the border command posts were on alert. Searchlights raked the clouds, dogs barked in the dark. Soldiers scanned the horizon for the sound of engines, except there was none. The balloon made no sound but the whisper of flame and the crackle of fabric. At 3:21 a.m., the flame flickered weakly. Peter frowned. Fuel's low. He had calculated for 30 minutes of flight. They were now at 43. The cold air made the propane burn faster. "We can't go back," Gunter said quietly. Peter didn't answer. He leaned out over the edge, squinting into the black below. Then, something. Fields. Trees. Not the straight, rigid grid of the East's farmland, but sprawling, irregular shapes. Could it be? The balloon began to descend. Too fast. "We're dropping," Petra screamed. The burner coughed again and the basket tilted sharply. One of the children began to cry. "Hold on," Peter shouted, twisting the valve with his full strength. The burner roared to life one last time, the blast of heat blinding and deafening. The balloon steadied, slowed, then sank again. The ground was rushing up now. "Brace!" The impact came like a hammer. The basket slammed into a slope, bounced, then dragged through wet grass. The families clung to the frame as dirt and mud sprayed around them. The burner shut off with a hiss. The balloon collapsed, folding over them like a giant sheet. For a moment there was only silence, the smell of earth, the taste of metal and smoke. Then, from somewhere nearby, a distant barking. Everyone froze. Peter crawled out from under the fabric, chest heaving. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flashlight. With trembling hands, he flicked it on. The beam cut through the mist, landing on a wooden post, painted in faded colors, black, red, and gold. His breath caught. That wasn't the East German flag. It was West Germany's. He fell to his knees. "We made it," he whispered. Behind him, Petra was crying openly, clutching her son. Gunter hugged his wife so tightly she gasped for air. The balloon lay in tatters around them, but it didn't matter. The impossible had happened. They had flown to freedom, on bedsheets. But as the dawn began to creep over the hills, their joy was cut short by headlights cresting the ridge. "Someone's coming," Peter said. "Hide the burner, quickly." They ducked into the grass as a car rolled closer, gravel crunching beneath its tires. The question hung like a blade in the morning air. Had they truly landed in the West? Or had the wind betrayed them one last time? The families crouched low in the dew-soaked grass, the deflated balloon draped around them like a shroud. The morning fog thickened, muting every sound but the slow crunch of tires approaching. Peter could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears. The children were silent now, too afraid even to breathe. A car door opened. Boots hit the ground. Then voices. Low, distant, impossible to make out. "Stay down," Peter whispered. He gripped the edge of the gondola frame, eyes barely above the grass line. Two silhouettes moved toward them through the mist, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Their uniforms were gray-green. The color meant everything. If it was East German gray-green, they were dead. "Guten Morgen," one of the men called out. The accent was thick, but different. Rounder, less sharp. "Alles in Ordnung?" Peter's head jerked up. He knew that dialect. Bavarian. He stood, almost stumbling, hands raised. "Bitte, wir sind aus dem Osten," he shouted, voice cracking. The two men froze. One raised his rifle instinctively, then hesitated. The other lowered his. "Aus dem Osten?" he repeated, disbelief dripping from his tone. Within minutes, more figures appeared. Local police officers this time. Their uniforms were now fully visible under the dawn light. They wore the uniforms of the Federal Republic, West Germany. Peter turned to Petra, his lips trembling. "It's real," he whispered. "It's real this time." The police approached carefully, scanning the bizarre scene, the shredded mass of fabric across the field, the propane tanks, the steel basket, the children clutching their mothers. "Mein Gott," one officer murmured. "You came from over there in that?" Peter nodded. "From Pusnik. 2 families, 8 people." The officer shook his head in astonishment. "That's nearly 30 kilometers over the border. Through the patrol zone. You should have been shot down 10 times over." Behind him, Gunter let out a sound that was half laughter, half sob. "We almost were." The officers ushered them into the car, wrapping blankets around their shoulders. The heater blasted warm air into the cramped vehicle. Petra clutched her son, tears cutting streaks through the suit on his cheeks. As the police radio crackled, a voice said, "Federal Command confirms. East German balloon found near Nela. Possible border crossing by civilians. Repeat, possible successful escape." The word successful echoed in Peter's mind like a prayer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, chaos had erupted. At 5:15 a.m., the Stasi had found a torn piece of balloon fabric near the launch site. Within hours, search teams scoured the forests and villages. Helicopters were ordered into the air. The Ministry for State Security believed it was an American plot, some propaganda stunt designed to humiliate the GDR. But as they interviewed neighbors, confiscated sewing machines, and interrogated fabric store owners, a horrifying truth dawned on them. The families had built the balloon themselves, from scratch, using household materials, and they had succeeded. The report filed that morning by Colonel Heinz Vogel of the Stasi Border Command was terse, almost embarrassed. Verbed escape method unprecedented. Technically simple, yet alarmingly effective. Recommend increased surveillance of textile sales. In West Germany, the news spread like wildfire. By evening, reporters had gathered outside the police station in Nela, shoving microphones at the bewildered refugees. Cameras clicked as the two men, still wearing their soot-stained work jackets, explained how they'd sewn together 1,200 square meters of fabric by hand. "We tested it in secret," Gunter said. "At night. If the police had found us, we'd have been executed." Peter added quietly, "We just wanted our children to grow up free." The reporters fell silent. Even the policemen watching from the doorway seemed to stand a little straighter. That night, as they were brought to a safe house in Bavaria, the families ate their first meal in freedom. Bread, sausage, hot coffee. Petra cried as she bit into it. Later, one of the children asked if they could go outside to play. "No guards?" he asked, blinking. "No guards," Petra smiled. "Not anymore." In the East, the Stasi continued their investigation for months. They interrogated textile suppliers, monitored propane shipments, even tried to reconstruct the balloon from recovered scraps. But it didn't matter, because the sky had already carried its message, loud and clear. Freedom was possible, even with nothing more than courage, ingenuity, and a few bedsheets.